Okay. All right. Good day, good afternoon. No, good evening, everybody. So I wanted to welcome you guys to our lecture on monster seaweed, as I call it. I'm sure Jason has many other names to what he's going to call it tonight. And he's from the Ocean Foundation in Washington, D.C. And simply I found him by reaching out all over to nonprofits and organizations that I know that would affect us here in Florida. And he graciously accepted our invitation to come and speak with you tonight. And he'll be doing a three-part lecture series on some of the great projects that they do at the Ocean Foundation. And Jason's been living and working with the foundation for about 1.5 years, and he hails from Arizona. So with that, Jason, thank you so much, and just unmute yourself before, and I'll mute everybody else.
Great, and then can you see my screen? Okay, fantastic. So first of all, it's an honor to be with all of you, and I'm delighted for your time. I know in the midst of a pandemic and everything going on in our lives, on a random Thursday night, I really appreciate you spending time with me. And so I will hopefully make this worthwhile. And anytime that you have questions, there'll be opportunity at the end. But if you want to stop and engage in a conversation with anything that I'm saying, we can do that as well. So as Sammy said, I'm Jason Donofrio. I work for the Ocean Foundation. We are actually the only community foundation for the ocean and coastal communities in the world. So there are no other community foundations exclusively devoted to the ocean. If you think about a traditional community foundation, they are bound by their geography, right? It would be like, the Sarasota Community Foundation or the Florida Community Foundation. Our community is the 71% of the ocean that covers the Earth's surface, and all of the coastal communities, like many of the communities that live in Florida, that interact with the ocean. So we are a global organization. As a community foundation, we not only run our own projects, and one of which I'll be talking about today, but we also host projects. So if you're a scientist or a researcher or an academic professional in a different country doing really good work on ocean conservation, your specialty is in doing that type of conservation. It is not in running a nonprofit organization. And so you have a lot of these academic and scientific professionals who don't really want to incorporate themselves. But then how do you know that they're a trusted source, that they're a verified project? So they can actually be hosted by the Ocean Foundation after we vet them and verify them. And so we actually host over 50 projects across 25 countries on all 7 continents. We sort of have 3 tenets that we follow. The first is to serve donors. So we sort of say, you tell us what your passion for the ocean is, and we will take care of the rest. And so part of that is because last year, if you looked at all of the philanthropic categories in the United States and you ranked them 1 through 9, the amount of money that Americans gave philanthropically to the environment was number 9. It was dead last. But then if you took a deeper investigation into that, only 4.5% of environmental funding went to the ocean. So we all know the ocean is vital to our existence as a human race. We all know the ocean serves so many purposes, yet it is honestly one of the most underfunded, underexplored, under-researched areas of the world. And so we really exist to help shine a light on some of the issues that affect all of us. So that's what we mean by serve donors. And then generate new ideas, which we're going to talk about today, and nurture implementers. That refers to helping these projects, stewarding them, helping them be effective. These are just some of the locations that we are in. around the world. So the dots represent everywhere where we have a presence. You'll notice some of them are in the middle of the ocean. Those are tiny islands out there, or some are research vessels. So they're actual ships out there in the ocean that are doing different scientific research projects. And then you'll notice there's a lot kind of in the Florida area and throughout the Caribbean and Latin America. And then these are just some of the projects that we host. We also have a set of organizational partners. So part of what the Ocean Foundation does is try and say, okay, if you're, I'll pick a company on here. If you're JetBlue and you're the primary airline carrier to the Caribbean, you have an invested interest in what happens to the coast of Florida and Puerto Rico and Dominican Republic. And so we've had we're very grateful to have these partners, these kind of corporate partners who help underwrite some of our initiatives, some of which, or one of which, we're going to talk about today. Some of these partners help seed the funding for us to do. Just a recap of our activities and who we are. So since our existence in 2002, we have helped to allocate $51.9 million to the ocean. And then last year, these are our 4 990 categories. These are the funds that we helped direct towards that. So we sort of break up what we do in these 4 categories: protecting marine habitats, protecting species, building the capacity of the actual communities, and then ocean literacy and public awareness. Okay, so now that you know a little bit about who we are as the Ocean Foundation, as the only community foundation for the ocean, now we're really going to dive into the good stuff, right? What we all came here to learn about, and that is sargassum. So if you live in Florida, I probably do not need to tell you what sargassum is, but for anyone that doesn't know, or as soon as I say this, you'll draw the connection. This is that really kind of nasty algae that is inundating the shores, that kind of piles up at a few inches high, sometimes a few feet high. It's that brown microalgae that you see washing up. It is a macroalgae. There are a number of different species all around the world. And it's really interesting because it's brand new to the scientific community. So sargassum is a naturally occurring algae in the ocean. And when it's in the ocean, it's a good thing, because just like any other species in the ocean, when it's alive, it's sequestering carbon, right? So that's really good. It's in the ocean, it's sequestering carbon. It also helps protect natural habitat protection for sea creatures that are out in the ocean. And so for generations, this has just been a very positive thing, naturally occurring in the ocean. You may rarely uncover strands of it in certain areas, but people really didn't see it in the way that we see it now. And then in 2011, it started inundating beaches throughout the Caribbean, Florida, and now even into Mexico and Latin America. And it's really having devastating effects for 3 major reasons. The first reason is environmental. So sargassum in the ocean, healthy, alive, good thing, sequestering carbon. When it starts to show up on the shore, as soon as it gets out of the water, it begins to decay. So now all of the carbon it helped to sequester out of the atmosphere, all of the CO2 it pulled out of the atmosphere, is now being re-released back into the atmosphere. So that's not good from a carbon sequestration standpoint, helping to fight climate change. It's also not necessarily healthy for people to be around. And that's sort of why it has that really foul odor, attracts a lot of flies. It's sort of a real nasty kind of thing. Another negative thing, the second is, ecologically speaking, when it starts to inundate these beaches, it starts to accumulate in these big, almost like mats. When that happens, it starts to suffocate all the life underneath it. So all of the shallow sea creatures get caught into it and suffocated. It also blocks out the sun. So the plants underneath that rely on the sun for photosynthesis and natural healthy growth, they're having disruption because it's creating this almost like blanket on the ocean floor. And then the third negative effect it's having is it is destroying tourism. And if you think about Florida and you think about the Caribbean, a lot of livelihoods depend on people visiting these places, spending their money in tourism, enjoying the beaches, moving there, enjoying the places that they love. And so in 2018, the Caribbean Tourism Bureau did a study, and they found that there was a 31% decrease in tourism bookings directly tied to sargassum. Because why would you want to spend your hard-earned money on a family vacation to go to a place where you can't enjoy the beach, right? So instead, you go to a different location. So, and most jobs depend on that. So it's become this really devastating problem for all of those different reasons. So much so that in 2014, the Sargasso Sea Commission was created. It was established by the Bermudian US law because the Sargasso Sea is off of the coast of Bermuda. And this gentleman, I don't know if you can see my pointer, but this guy smiling in the back, that's Mark Spalding. He's the president of the Ocean Foundation. So he's my boss. So he's on, this is the commission. He's on the Sargasso Sea Commission. So this is something that the Ocean Foundation since 2014 has been spending a lot of time thinking about and trying to figure out what we can do to solve it. So these are to recap so everyone sees this picture, right? This probably seems really familiar. You probably have, just from a show of hands, because I can still see folks, those that have their camera on, raise your hand if you are familiar with this or have seen this before. Okay, yes, most people, pretty much everyone. Yeah, so 30% decrease in tourism, coral reefs and seagrass beds are being smothered. It's depleting oxygen. As sargassum decays, it releases hydrogen sulfide as well as carbon. And then it's just putting severe stress on shorelines, and it's basically left the people who manage the beaches, it's left them with the responsibility of what to do with it. And so unfortunately what's happening is that a lot of companies are just spending an enormous amount of money to go rake it up, gather it, and then dump it in a landfill. And not only is that sort of a wasted use, but every time that you gather the sargassum off the beach, once it's already gone on the beach, you're pulling sand off the beach, which means over time that will lead to coastal erosion. So a lot of the problems we're already trying to solve, like having strong coastlines to ward off against flooding and increased storms, we're also damaging by trying to remove this and inevitably pulling sand. So, once it gets on the beach, it's a problem. So what do we do about this? So this is what the Ocean Foundation is really excited to talk to you about today and what we're working on. So we're trying to turn the problem into a solution. We have partnered with these companies that are working on a pilot project in this farming town of Miches, Dominican Republic. Now, what we're doing is we are removing, well, first, let me back up and say this. Because this issue started to arise really in 2011, and because we don't actually know the direct cause, right? A scientist can't tell you A plus B equals sargassum on the beach. Now, it is probably a catalyst of things. It is probably ocean acidification, the warming of our waters, the rise of sea temperatures, a cocktail of different things happening to the ocean that are fundamentally changing the ocean. But because we don't exactly know what is causing it, and because it shows up in different quantities in different areas throughout the region, companies will not invest the millions of dollars it would require to repurpose this. right? Because the private industry is really innovative. And you can basically repurpose sargassum for a lot of different things, right? Anything organic, people can figure out a way to turn it into something else. But because you don't know that you're going to have this consistent supply, because it just started showing up in 2011, and some years it's in Mexico more, some years it's in Florida more, some years it's in Puerto Rico more. You're not exactly going to invest millions of dollars in infrastructure to get it, repurpose it, and figure out if there's a market for it. So it's left these local municipalities to deal with it. So that led the Ocean Foundation to figure out, well, can we pilot a low-cost solution to figure out how to turn this problem into a solution? So what we're doing is we are collecting the sargassum before it reaches the shore. So we're collecting it in the water. These boats come along because it gathers it in the nets and filters it onto the boat. Then we are transporting it locally on shore to the local farming town of Miches, and we're using it as organic compost fertilizer to lands that have either been over-farmed or don't have nutrient-rich soil. And so the results that are already yielding indicate that this is working. So first of all, we're taking the carbon, we're sequestering it in the ground, and it doesn't get released. So we're preventing CO2 from being released in the atmosphere. We're improving the soil of this farming land. And then we're finding a use for this thing that right now is a nuisance. So there's a benefit to local farmers to save money and potentially create a local food system market where many island communities are importing a lot of their food. This is a way for local food systems to develop. It's a relatively low cost solution. So because you're gathering it before it reaches the shore, you don't have to clean it in the same way. It's really just basically removing the salinity from the salt that's in the ocean. And then you're addressing climate change. You are directly addressing climate change because this is an effective method of carbon sequestration and carbon storage. And our eventual goal is to define this methodology so that we can actually generate certified carbon credits for the carbon market. So companies who want to purchase carbon credits can actually invest in this kind of project. To further give some explanation about, we call this sargassum insetting. So carbon insetting is a method for sequestering and storing carbon in a way that reduces the footprint, but also enhances the value chain. So when we say carbon offsetting, someone says, I'm taking a flight from Miami to New York and back again. That's going to generate a carbon footprint, right? Because the plane I get on is going to burn jet fuel into the atmosphere. And so you can calculate what your carbon footprint is, and then you can invest in a project that sequesters carbon that offsets your footprint. Insetting is basically the same thing. It's basically reducing greenhouse gas emissions that are directly related either by geography, a production, or a commodity. This is a picture of Miche. So this is like the farmers in action. Using sargassum seaweed as organic agriculture. So it also allows for us to continue to help promote the tourism industry while also increasing local food production. The way that we're removing sargassum also helps prevent the degradation of coastal ecosystems and helps to protect shorelines, which is going to be really important. We need to protect Florida's shoreline, not accidentally pull sand and cause erosion. And then we have a mechanism that we think will, like I said, generate carbon credits into the future. Just to give everyone a visual view, I'm a visual person, so this is the Dominican Republic. This is it. So we are collecting it along this shoreline, and so it's a very short transportation into this area. We're also working with local foundations, the Tropicali Foundation and the Punta Cana Foundation, to make sure we're connected with the local community. And then if you're curious about the town that we're doing this in, it's a one of the more impoverished areas. That's why we're doing it there, because it's an area of great need. It's approximately 21,000 live in the area. And if you look at sort of some of the classifications, 55% of the population is classified as living in poverty and over 9% in extreme poverty. So, you know, we sort of came to this from a sargassum is a bad thing. How can we help solve that problem? But now if we're helping to improve local livelihoods, you know, all the better. So these are some real-time photos of the farming. So this picture on the left is these omri beans that they planted before the compost, before we put sargassum into the soil, and this is afterwards. And you can see that it's, you know, there's a very positive yield. And so that is something that we need to continue to test. Does it work for multiple crop yields in multiple conditions? Is it, you know, what are the seasonalities? What we're really trying to do in Meat Chase is develop this methodology so that we can scale it throughout the region, so that it can be applied in places in Florida. It can be applied in places in Puerto Rico, in Mexico. You know, this is something that we're really trying to hone the methodology so that it can be expanded to all of the areas that are being affected by this issue. Just to let people know specifically about this project, in terms of agriculture in particular, you know, most of these local farmers do lack adequate tools, and you know, there's technical transfer of knowledge that you know is critical, both from us to them and them to us. So that is a key component of the project. And then we're also asking them, you know, we're monitoring what the crop yields are to figure out how we can help develop what the local food market will be. So if they can have predictability about the supplies that they're producing, now they can sort of etch out what demands they can fulfill. And so they can sort of create this local market, you know, for their community. This is sort of everything that I said, but you know, it starts out here. And so you see this is like one of the more really sophisticated operations, but there's almost like this, you know, this tube, but it's almost like a buoy system that basically you put out to protect the shoreline. So as the sargassum is coming in, it gets blocked by this tube, more sargassum pushes in, and it starts to compact and inundate all along. Then you bring this boat out and it starts to gather all of it and bring it into the boat. And then they mix it with things like biochar, right? So it's not straight, like we're just taking the sargassum and dumping it into the dirt. We are mixing it with other fertilizers and nutrients. And that's really part of the methodology that we're trying to perfect. How much biochar needs to be used, even things like wood chippings. And so we're using byproducts of other things that would normally go to waste as a mixture of organic compost fertilizer. And then there is actually a Club Med resort. And so this is something that I think is really interesting. And there's some interesting parallels to Florida, because we actually launched this project with seed funding from Marriott International, because as someone in the hospitality industry, they recognized, okay, this is a problem that we're going to have to deal with. And so, yes, municipalities are mostly dealing with this right now, right? If they own the beaches, if they manage the beaches, if it's a park service that manages the beaches, they are the ones responsible for this. But more and more, there are real opportunities to engage the private industry, in particular the hospitality industry, for us to work together to collectively solve this problem. And so these are just some of our other partners that we participate with. So one of the things that I think is really important to note is that right now there is a lot of interest from the global community and the financial markets to invest. And you all have probably heard about, environmental, social governance, impact investing, where companies are saying we have to align our investments with the mission, our global mission. And so part of using projects like this, the reason that these are really critical is because investors don't want to invest in unproven, untested projects. So by us piloting these new innovative solutions and really perfecting the methodology, what we're also doing is taking the risk out of these projects. We are saying through philanthropic support, through partners like Marriott, we're able to do these projects, prove the concept so that they can be scaled on a large scale. Municipalities can adopt them. The financial markets can figure out what the incentives are for them to invest in this and how it protects these different coastlines. And so I think that that's also really important. As the Ocean Foundation, as a community foundation, as a nonprofit, we're not trying to develop some proprietary technology that then we want to sell and make a bunch of money on. What we want to do is develop a methodology that then can be available and invested in and scaled up, because it provides all of these critical benefits to these communities that stand to gain economically, environmentally, and socially as well. So I'm gonna pause there and just see if what questions people have. I know this is probably this is a new topic. It's a brand new project. Sargassum in and of itself, like I said, only really started inundating beaches in 2011. So let me just take a pause right there and see any questions people have either about the Ocean Foundation, Sargassum, this particular project, or what's going on in Florida.
I always have questions. So I'm going to get the ball rolling.
Okay.
So you said that it's hard to know about how big the events are going to be yearly, but when you look at news articles, they're mentioning that our scientists and NOAA and satellite, and they're trying to predict it every year whether it's going to be worse than the last. And do you guys interact with these scientists and stuff like that to bring them down to earth and say, hey, because some people are building up predicting a hurricane, they can predict the sargassum, and I think they said the 2018 I think was the worst year. So what do you think about all of that from the scientist's perspective?
Yeah, it's a great question. Yes, we do. So we have a great relationship with NOAA. The Ocean Foundation also helps countries monitor their waters, particularly around ocean acidification, basically the chemistry of their ocean. And we work with NOAA directly on that. So there, we engage with them on this. And then because our president is one of the commissioners on the Sargasso Sea Commission, that is the global commission charged with sort of monitoring this. And they meet regularly and convene. And that is sort of their part of their charge, is to kind of see what can we predict based on what satellites are telling us, what historical data is telling us, what scientific data is telling us, and then can we help communities be prepared for that. So there's not a clear picture to say it's going to be up or down X% next year or the year after that, but it is something we're trying to monitor. And what is happening right now is we're also trying to do it retroactively, where once it's occurred, you can catalog it, and that's how you can look back and say, are there trends that we can see? One thing we know is it's increasing, and you probably just feel that, experience it, see that. It has become more and more prevalent, over the past few years.
I have a question. Could communities prevent the sargassum ever reaching the beach, just like you did in Dominican Republic?
Could what prevent? I'm sorry.
To prevent it from reaching the beach. because you did it very successfully in Dominican Republic and collected it out in the water, and the beach was clean. Can communities start something like that and collect it when it is still in the water rather than raking it up when it's on the beach?
That was a
Absolutely.
store, wasn't it?
Yes,
That was a store.
absolutely. Yeah, that's the goal. That's what we want. Yeah. Yes. And companies are doing it. I mean, we are the I think one of the first that are doing it that way and then turning it into compost fertilizer. But a lot of companies are figuring out how to collect it before it gets to the shore. And that
I
is,
heard that.
oh, go
I heard
ahead.
that the Mexican Navy has a lot of ships that are collecting it as well.
Yeah, I don't know specifically about that, but it would not surprise me because once it reaches your beach, I mean, it's sort of game over, right? It's going to be twice or three times more expensive to deal with once it gets to your shore. No one wants to go to your beaches, so you're getting hit with a lack of visitation and revenue that way. And then, like I said, when you have to gather it out of your beach, you are pulling sand, no matter how sophisticated the technology. And so over time, you're going to erode your coastlines, which means you're going to have to truck in more sand just to keep your shoreline stable. So the key really is to collect it offshore before it gets onshore onto the beach, 100%. Plus, once it gets on shore, that sargassum is dead. There's nothing you can really do with it. It's starting to decay. If you collect it in the water, it's still alive. And if you repurpose it quickly, then you can maintain the carbon storage.
You said that there were two separate, I mean, it shows up at different beaches at different times. So if it does not show up in the Dominican Republic, are you then shipping it back to them if they need it? Or what are you doing if it doesn't show up there?
Yeah.
And number two, when you're getting it out of the shallow water, are you affecting the shallow breeders or whatever is in that water?
Both great questions. So to answer the first one, we would love for there to not be a supply of this. That has not been the problem. In fact, we have more of it than we know what to do with it. There's actually like abundant supply of it right now. We've collected more than we can compost at this point. So unfortunately, that's the supply has been consistent. In terms of having an adverse effect, it's always a risk, which is why you have to do it correctly. That being said, leaving the sargassum in the shallow water is probably the worst thing we can do because it creates this matting where nothing can really live. It suffocates, turtles and fish and different shallow sea creatures. So removing it before it gets too shallow, we think is actually helping to protect that shallow ecosystem. But again, that is something that we are also monitoring in the process and making sure that we're not having adverse effects. That's a great question.
I have a question from one of our members who wants to know what caused the sargassum to really hit the shores in 2011.
Yeah, we don't, like I said, there's no definitive answer, but the consensus is basically it's a combination of all of the extreme changes to the ocean that we've seen over the last 50 years. The temperature has gotten warmer on measurable degrees. The sea level has risen to measurable degrees. And what most people don't realize, we don't talk a lot about, the ocean is 30% more acidic today than it was 200 years ago. And it is acidifying faster today than at any point on the human record. So ocean acidification is the changing chemistry of the pH level of the ocean, and it has adverse effects. It basically, it's really devastating to shellfish because what happens is it's creating these really adverse conditions. And so the way that scientists like to explain it is like, imagine you only have so much energy in your body to burn to get through the day, right? Ocean acidification makes the shellfish almost burn twice or 3 or 4 times as much energy because the conditions are so intense, which means they're not growing to maturity. So we already know that, like, as we've acidified the ocean, as we've warmed the water, and all of this is a result to an excess of carbon emissions in the atmosphere. So the ocean is the world's largest carbon sink. It holds more carbon than all of the terrestrial forests in the world combined, right? More than the Amazonian rainforest, more than any of the rainforests in the world. It is our largest carbon sink. And so as you start to tilt that carbon sink out of balance, it starts to have negative effects. One of which we know is that it doesn't cause hurricanes. It just makes them more intense, stronger, and more frequent, right? So that's a negative effect of some of these things we've seen. And so we think that sargassum is a part of that, right? Because now if the storms are more frequent and intense, you're changing currents, right? So we've redirected this naturally occurring thing in the ocean. If you're redirecting currents and you're changing the chemistry, now you've maybe redirected where it goes. And the place where it's going is the Caribbean and places like Florida.
Anybody else have a question? Can you squash a rumor possibly that the Amazon and the fertilization have something to do with the sargassum increase?
Yeah, no, I don't know about that, about Amazon, but I can speak. So I haven't heard anything about that. Fertilizer, though. So we're based in Washington, D.C. We're active in our own backyard. So we're part of the Chesapeake Bay Funders Network. The Chesapeake Bay is, right here in our own backyard. And they suffered a lot of negative consequences because of fertilizer and nitrogen loads and nutrient runoff from farms, right? So when you over fertilize farms and then you're using water for those farms, that water's got to go somewhere, right? And so agricultural runoff, as we just sort of generally define, it's all of the waste of a farm, of an agricultural setup running off. And it's got to go somewhere, and it enters our waterways, our streams, our lakes, our bays, and sometimes our oceans. And that water carries with it high levels of nitrogen loads because it's highly packed with fertilizer. So I have not heard that it leading to sargassum, but what it does lead to are something called algae blooms, or can lead to something called algae blooms. And so this was a big issue in the Chesapeake Bay, where about 10 years ago, they said close to a third of the bay would turn into essentially a dead zone because there was so much agricultural runoff coming into it that it was creating these algae blooms and it was suffocating life around it. And so essentially a third of the bay was a dead zone. They have put in restrictions and they have and policies and different practices, and I don't believe they have that issue anymore, and the bay has really come back as sort of a success story. But too much agricultural runoff with high levels of nitrogen loads into waterways can lead to negative consequences, but I have not heard it linked to sargassum. Yeah, you have a question? Someone has a question?
Just unmute yourself, Mrs. Gill.
There we go. A couple of years ago, friends of mine that live in the Tampa Bay area experienced red tide algae blooms. And we've had a few on our coast, although we're the ocean side. Can you talk more about how that impacts us and why it's important, along with the sargassum that has happened the last few years? Why is the red algae bloom happening?
Yeah, so again, a similar rationale of why it's occurring, no direct link, but for all of those same reasons I mentioned. But red tide and something called harmful algal blooms are pretty unique to Florida. So unfortunately, you can feel special. They do occur elsewhere, but red tide is really something that is occurring in Florida for a lot of the same reasons that I mentioned. It is, you're sort of in the direct pathway of the negative consequences that would occur from a warming ocean and rising seals. The Ocean Foundation actually convened a panel of all the groups in Florida working on harmful algal blooms last year to talk about this because it was such a big issue. And so Tampa Bay in particular.
Yeah.
And I can send you.
Unbelievable, the pictures they send me.
Yeah.
Is it dangerous to go into the water with either sargassum or the red algae bloom?
Yeah, it's a little controversial to say what definitively because the science is like there's no definitive science. It is not advisable. We would say it's not advisable. We can't make definitive medical claims at this point because they're still studying that, and quite frankly, like toxicity in humans from things occurring in nature is woefully understudied in general.
Right.
However, we know, given the composition of what these things are made of, not great, not advisable.
Well, people get hives, rashes. I mean, have this been studied?
Yeah, people have. Yeah. So again, that's part of, there needs to be more scientific study, but there's been anecdotal stories of people saying that, sure, that's dependent on the person, right? People's skin react differently. But, one of the things that is very common with sargassum is if you walk through sargassum, even just the walk, let's say from your hotel across the beach into the ocean, you'll come out and you have all these bumps all over your legs. That's not sargassum. Those are like sand gnats, like little flies, because the sargassum attracts them and they're just biting you because they're there in the like thousands or millions. I mean, I don't really even know, right? But like that's happened where people are like, oh, I have all these bites, and it's like, so it's just not a great thing to be around, right? It attracts some pretty gnarly creatures. So there's also that as well.
Thanks for letting us know the dangers of it. I never thought about through it and getting bitten. Maybe we should wear rain boots.
Yeah, so that's not the sargassum. Those are just like gnats, and it's just like getting bit by a gnat, so it's not going to kill you or anything like that. But that is like a common thing of, and if you look closely to that, you will see, because what it is it's something that was alive decomposing, right? So that's just kind of a naturally occurring thing that occurs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Real quick before you continue, so you're saying that the sargassum it has to be transported pretty much live, and with all that sargassum, are you guys researching a way to ship it like further in where people do need it, because eventually there's not a lot of agricultural land that could use all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. That is something that they're looking at, because the compost, the end product, is not 100% sargassum, right? So it's a mix of something called biochar, but it's mixed with a variety of other things that make the fertilizer all organic. Like I said, some could be wood chippings, all different types of bio products and mixed with dirt. And so part of what we're studying is, if you do that, how long does that last, and can it be shipped? We know the sargassum has to be harvested and transported locally, but then once you turn it into fertilizer, how long can that fertilizer last? And that's something we're actively testing right now. There's also, airlines are trying to turn their waste into energy. And so there's also talk of using excess sargassum or sargassum that is not clean enough. Maybe it's been contaminated with other things that could also be used to this. So you can take organic matter and use different processes to then turn it into energy, right? And so airline companies are taking their bio waste and figuring out if they can turn that into energy. And sargassum could be used as well. So just, you use whatever you can for fertilizer, and you use the strandings, as we call them, that maybe don't make the cut for fertilizer into an energy product. Then you're using 100% of it. But the real key is you're getting rid of it, and you're keeping the beaches clean, and you're helping to protect these local livelihoods, and you're helping people to protect the places that they love. And as someone that works for an ocean organization, I will tell you, very few people love the ocean, have a passion for the ocean, who don't experience the ocean. Most people who love the ocean, most people who are like, we want to do something about plastic, or we want to save the whales, or we just want to love the ocean, typically grow up in a place or live in a place where they can experience the ocean, where they can access it. And so, in addition to all of the other threats that sargassum poses, if it also just prevents people from enjoying and accessing the ocean, that also means like we're at threat of generations of people not growing up, experiencing it, having a negative view. Oh, the ocean, the beach, that's this nasty thing instead of this beautiful thing. And so it also, we want to build generations of people who love the ocean and want to protect it. So, it also doesn't give the ocean a good look, so to speak. And I see we have another guest, Tammy, that has joined us in your lap.
Yes, she wanted to join the party.
That's good.
Yes. So I'll let you continue.
So that's it. I mean, other questions that people have?
Do you want to tell us give us a little teaser about next month? I was trying to tell a little bit, but I think everybody, when you hear plastics, I think everybody kind of has like the same thought that I do when you get a company like you. So I think even though we have a small group, we're recording this. So let's go ahead and tease them and get them all excited for when you come back next month and talk about plastics.
You got it. And again, thank you all for your time. I really, really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So, plastic. So we joke, folks that have seen The Graduate, Dustin Hoffman movie, there's a very famous line in there when he's trying to figure out what to do with his life, and he's at a party and the guy looks at him and he's like, plastics, kid, that's the future. That movie was like in the 80s, and man, was that prophetic. It really became the future. So plastic is new, right? When we started producing plastic, I don't know, 50s, 60s, really ramped it up in the 70s. And so 50 years of plastic production has created 500 years of persistent, durable pollution. And here's the thing about plastic. It never goes away. It can't. It cannot biodegrade, ever, in nature. It just breaks up into smaller and small pieces that we call microplastic. And when it gets into the ocean, it really can never go away because, the ocean temperatures are too cold. It will prevent it from biodegrading. And so it just breaks up into microplastics that fish eat, and then we eat the fish, and then we ingest those microplastics. And so it's this problem because, you can't recycle your way out. You can't clean your way out. Less than 15% of plastic is recycled in the United States and less than like 12% globally. And then really it's like less than 2% is truly recycled, where it gets turned into a product of equal or greater value. And so it's like this thing that, yes, plastic has a very valuable use, but like, man, we have this thing once and then it's with us forever. Like, that's a big commitment, like that is a big commitment to have this thing forever. And one thing that we've seen, particularly in the pandemic, with PPE, personal protection equipment, plastic is really valuable, right? Like there's a really valuable use, particularly in the medical profession. So the Ocean Foundation takes a very nuanced look at this. Another thing that plastic has done is it has lightweighted transportation. So if you think about an airplane, like a lot of parts of an airplane are made of different types of plastic that have made it more lightweight and fuel efficient. And so if you were to replace those with metal or even like a lightweighting metal like aluminum, you're probably going to need more fuel than you're burning more carbon, right? In the medical profession, some things are single use, right? Like you're using a syringe or something like that for hygienic purposes, you want that to be one use. So the Ocean Foundation has really come at this and said, there is a real valuable use for plastic. However, we can't recycle it. And the reason you can't recycle plastic is literally the most complex product we make. There are up to 40 or 50 different types of what are called polymers. Polymers are the chemical agent that make plastic. And so every plastic that you have is basically made different, right? Your fork, your clear fork is made differently than your white fork, that is made differently than your blue fork, right? They're all made differently, which means you would need to actually recycle it, a different recycling plant for every plastic product ever produced. Can't do.
Wow,
So,
that sounds like that's like a ton of, that's crazy to even think.
Right. So the Ocean Foundation's like, okay, we're not opposed to plastic bag bans or skip the straw campaigns or any of that. We're not opposed to people being more educated consumers. We think those are good things. But hey, let's get real. Those are not solving the problem. If you want to solve the problem, we have to engage the chemical science industry to re-engineer the way that plastic is made and streamline the process. Root out the plastics that are inherently hazardous. Like you don't need polystyrene, styrofoam. That's a carcinogen. You don't need styrofoam. You could live without it. But you do need like prenatal tubes, right? Like prenatal feeding tubes. Like that's pretty important. So you create like a hierarchy that says, let's get rid of like the useless plastics. Then we have these whole set of plastics that we need. How do we streamline production? And the last thing I'll say to tease this, so we don't give it all away, is fracking, the process in which natural gas is extracted, has rapidly expanded in the United States. Natural gas, as they refer to it, is way cheaper than petroleum. Right now, the way that we make plastic is through petroleum. So it's basically like oil companies who are producing oil, and they're using the byproduct of that to produce plastic. But now you have this fuel to make plastic that's way cheaper. So by the plastic manufacturer's own estimations, like your Coca-Colas of the world, plastic production is going to increase by 30% over the next 30 years in the United States. It's not decreasing. So it's great that people aren't having straws. That's cool. But we have to engage the manufacturers who, for the first time ever, are aware they need to be engaged and have the conversation because consumers care. They know their consumers care. And so there's a way that we can redesign the way that plastics are made to streamline them, to make them less complex so that we can repurpose them. And that is something called the circular economy, where instead of using a plastic product once and it gets thrown away and buried in a landfill or shipped to Southeast Asia, we're able to truly recycle it and turn it into a different product. And that product keeps getting turned into something else and reused over and over again. And so instead of it being linear, it's a circle of reuse. And that's how we eliminate pollution from accumulating our ocean and our landfills and our waterways. So there's a real solution. Companies are open to being engaged, but that's sort of our approach. Is we're saying we have to design it in a different way that just makes it more standard and simple. And there's actually legislation that was introduced this year to do that. And there's bipartisan support, and the manufacturers understand that they cannot continue with the status quo, that they do have to figure out how to, if they want to keep making plastic in the future, they have to figure out a more responsible way to make it. And that's what our campaign is focused on.
So am I hearing you say that all my efforts to recycle plastic every day in my kitchen are to naught?
Okay, no, not totally. And here's the thing: I recycle. Okay, so if I recycle, and it's not for nothing. It's just not the solution we need. So it helps, but it doesn't help enough. And so it's better to help than harm. It's just they can really only recycle. You should look at it this way: they can really only recycle 15% of what you're recycling. But if you didn't recycle it all, it'd be 0%. So it's better than nothing, but it's very difficult right now just because of how complex we've made the process. The other reason why I'm going to tell you it's important is the only reason we can run this campaign, the only reason companies are willing to have this conversation is because people like you have been dutifully recycling. So it's created a market for plastic. So forget about what's being currently recycled. You are creating to the demand, because that's how it's going to work. Is they're going to say, okay, we're with you. We're going to produce plastic in a way that can be turned into something else. Show us that there's a market. Show us that people are actually going to give us the plastic back. You are showing that you will give the plastic back. So I say keep doing it, because you are actually conditioning these companies to do this, because they know that they have customers who, if they buy their plastic products, will recycle. So it helps, it counts, it's just not 100%.
Thank you.
Great.
All right. Anybody else? But before we say our good night, Mrs. Jill, you have to unmute yourself.
You muted me. Okay, just one thing. I know we have recycle bins, and I think most of us are pretty diligent about using them in this community. But you know that on the blue bin, it says no plastic bags. So I've been pretty good about bringing them back the last few years. I never even knew that until recently. And I bring back the plastic bags, and outside of Publix, they have these bins, and also for the foam trays and the egg cartons and all that kind of stuff. So I've been trying to do my part, but I realized that these small cans that people put them in, it's not that many people doing it if there's only like one container for foam cartons, say. So, I'm just wondering what.
Well, you bring up a good point. You bring up actually a really good point, and this piggybacks on the question before. You should think about recycling. So I gave you generalizations for the United States on that previous answer. Let me take that one step back. Let me backtrack for a second. You should think about recycling like schools. They are different depending on where you live. Some schools are really good, and some schools are really bad, right? Recycling is run at the municipal level. So if you have a municipality that is really good at recycling, they could be recycling 85% or 50% or 90%, right? Because they're sorting it, they have good collection centers. A lot of this comes down to how good their collection centers are, how well they're able to sort it on site, all of those types of things, right? But those are all run by your local municipality. And so if you have an efficient municipality, they're probably doing this. And I will tell you right now, the fact that they even specify what you can and cannot means you are above average, because a lot are single stream, throw everything in there. That's really hard to recycle. So the fact that they're already pre-screening it, it means that they're probably above average. They're probably pretty good, to be honest.
So I'm hoping so. I really am. I
Yeah.
think it's okay. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Everybody, thank you so much for coming. And Jason, we got like 2 lectures for one.
Yeah.
And that's awesome. It's a great way, to continue what we have been trying to do here at Gleneagles throughout the summer is, learn more about all this environmental change and climate. And I think if any of you were at our last Natalia's on biodiversity, remember she showed us that compost that he was talking about? She was explaining that, and I think we were all excited when we heard about that. So now this is one of the things that when she was talking about mixing it in to agriculture. So everything plays a big part. And I think we're just going to keep on going with this at Gleneagles. And you never know, maybe we'll try to start our own little organization. I don't know. Like I said, I want to save the world now if I can. So I think a lot of us are getting more and more interested and have no idea it's happening right outside our door. So I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us. And everybody,
when is the next plastic lecture? Is that set up?
No, it'll be in October. And as soon as Jason picks a Thursday, we're going to continue with our lectures on Thursday nights at 8 o'clock. And so it'll probably be, I'll talk with Jason, at least, we're going to give people at least 3 weeks from now, at least maybe to the middle of October to have
These
them
are
come back.
recorded, Tammy? They're recorded? Can we
Yes.
look at them? Like I missed the one on the biodiversity. Could I look at that? Where would I find that?
It's on our YouTube channel. And tomorrow, if I get my blog out in time, I will send everybody like a link, and I try to do it like with a lot of my blogs, say, hey, this is a YouTube link and it'll have all our lectures. Now, the only thing is that they're not categorized, but you can just, maybe I can do that. Maybe I can have somebody in the IT categorize all our lectures for the summer so you can find it in one big clump and play them.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. And don't forget,
Thank you.
Saturday, we have Ned Dorman, and we're going to go from Monster Seaweed to Motown. So there we go. We're getting it all in. And then we have our scavenger hunt on Sunday, which is going to be super fun. So I hope you join me then. Okay, everybody? So I will see you guys later. And thank you, Jason, once again.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.
Thank you.
Mine's the opposite.
Thanks, Mr. Kavanaugh, for coming.
It was good. It was good.